Hi folks, I am the one and only Florida Man, broadcasting to you from a place other than Florida Man. Today I'm bringing you a variant after-action report that I played with various players from PlayDiplomacy.com. Argentina was played by AKFD and later Harun Riaz. Brazil was played by the mysterious V-Ghost. Chile was ruled by Jordan767. Colombia was played by the venerable Antigonos. Paraguay was played with great skill by Roland Trotter. Peru was played by Don Juan of Austria. Venezuela was controlled by the brutal dictator Bratz FFL, and I played the famously mighty and powerful nation of Bolivia. This variant is called South American Supremacy, and although the victory condition, gaining 18 supply centers, is the same as on the standard map, you will note that this map is slightly different from the standard map, in that the game takes place in South America, there are navigable rivers on this map, and the Andes are a factor in the game. Specifically, the Andes are impassable, except for in areas where there are mountain passes, which are indicated on the map. In case you are unfamiliar with South American geography, the Andes are a mountain range that divides the continent, separating the west coast from the much larger east portion of the map. The existence of the Andes plays a huge role in playing on this map, so it needed to be mentioned here. Also, it's worth noting that unlike the War in the Americas map, this map takes place in an era before the Panama Canal, so I believe there's only one way to get fleets from the east coast to the west coast or vice versa, and that's by going through the Straits of Magellan. Also, there are impassable spaces on this map: Tierra del Fuego, British Guyana, Dutch Guyana, and French Guyana. Now we've got these geography notes out of the way. This after-action report is the Chilean perspective. One more note. I believe we refer occasionally to Paraguay as a he in this video, and I do not believe Roland Trotter identifies as a man, so that's our mistake. I do refer to people by their preferred masculine or feminine pronouns, but we had not actually asked Roland Trotter in advance about this, and there is a tendency for most players in the hobby to be men, so we made a presumption here that turned out to be inaccurate. Now, on to the game. You and I played this South American Supremacy variant of Diplomacy, an interesting South American map, in which I was Bolivia and you were Chile. Please go ahead and give me your thoughts on the beginning of the game.
All right. So I actually entered the game as a reserve, so I didn't do a whole lot of thinking about the game ahead of the game because did not necessarily know I was going to get subbed in on year one.
That's a good point. I forgot that.
Yeah, so year one, I got subbed in, and I got subbed in as Chile. And so kind of looking at the map, I had a few initial thoughts about Chile. So Chile I always kind of looked at Chile as a naval power because it's got a whole bunch of coastal centers, and all of the centers that you can kind of get to are also coastal. And really, you can defend yourself with, one or two armies at most. And even if you end up, capturing large parts of Argentina or Bolivia, you can defend those with one or two armies at most. And so I kind of always was hoping to go more for fleets because I think that was going to go a lot better for me. The other thing I kind of saw, and I actually mentioned this to you, is that I think it's hard for Chile and Bolivia to stab each other and make it stick, at least in the early game. And that's because we have a super narrow frontage between us. There's you can't get more than 2 units on any center at a time. And so someone has to make a pretty big mistake in order to get stabbed. And obviously I did that, and then much later you got stabbed. But I think those mistakes had to happen. It wasn't going to happen just as a matter of course. It wasn't an inherently precarious position. And so I kind of wanted to work with you because of that.
That's an interesting point. I do see the geography of our positions making it kind of more difficult for us to fight each other in the early game, yeah. We could easily keep each other from growing. We could bounce in Golfo de Guafo, and if that happened, then you and I would each only get one build in year one.
Yeah, and I was also kind of hoping that wouldn't happen, and so I think we were actually looking at an old version of the map where the battle fleet couldn't go to Drake Passage. But regardless, I just claimed Golfo de Guafo, and I was kind of hoping that by doing so early, then I could kind of prevent that situation because one of us is just going to get it.
Yeah. I recall there was some negotiation about that, actually. I think you actually discussed it with me and, basically said what you were going to do and that you hoped I wouldn't bounce you. And I think ultimately I agreed because it wouldn't have been helpful to either of us. It would have just started us off on the absolute wrong foot.
Yeah, and that is definitely true. And it worked out okay for us in year one, because we both got our 2 centers.
Yes.
Which I know was kind of precarious because you didn't know what Peru was going to do. But
I tried to pressure Peru into doing what I needed him to do.
Yeah.
And he did ultimately stay out of Bahia de Arica, allowing me in. So I think partially because he was concerned about Colombia, which seems to have been kind of reasonable.
Ultimately he made the right call there.
I suppose that's true. I mean, bouncing with me certainly wouldn't have done him any good.
It certainly would not have. And then, kind of behind the scenes, what was going on at this point is, so Paraguay and you and I were all kind of looking to attack Argentina. And I think Paraguay initially suggested that, but I was happy to go along with it because I needed something to do. And, may as well take the enemy that other people have already decided on. And you seemed kind of hesitant, but ultimately I think you went along with it as well.
Yeah, I believe you're right. I think it was probably because I was either more interested in attacking Peru early on, or because I might have been more interested in attacking you.
One of the two.
But I guess you did better with your negotiations than Argentina did.
Yeah, I think kind of you, me, Paraguay, and Colombia were the ones who were definitely talking more effectively. And so I'm not super surprised that that's how the final 4 of the game ended up. But
all right, and you built an army and a fleet. I don't feel like that needs too much explanation. It's for the plan to attack Argentina, right?
Yep, sure is.
Makes sense. I also built a fleet here and an army.
I was not especially happy about your fleet build, but
not enthused.
It seemed like a good choice for you, and so I couldn't really say like subsume your needs to mine in year one, please.
Yeah, no, I guess that would not have seemed entirely reasonable to me. And could have been very useful against Peru. We'll see what happens.
We sure will.
And I actually, maybe I even missed an opportunity here to go after Peru early, because I could have moved Arica to Arequipa as well, and it wouldn't have bounced, and then I could have tried to attack Lima at some point. But anyway, what happens is clearly that you do successfully begin pursuing Argentinian centers, because Argentina falsely believed that Patagonia would be secure if it was vacated to go for the Malvines or the Falklands.
Yeah, and I definitely was leading him on there, and I think I got Paraguay leading him on as well. So we did take him by surprise, which is the only reason that worked, because those are all completely unsupported moves.
Yeah. The Andes could have been a really good defensive barrier for Argentina, but because Argentina was seemingly completely confident in your, unwillingness to start a war, Argentina.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what he was thinking there, because I'm not really sure why else I would have built an army in Santiago, but
that's a good point. It would have made much more sense,
I guess.
Yeah, it would have made much more sense to have an army in Valparaiso if it was going after me.
Yeah.
But maybe he was thinking you were planning a convoy against me.
Yeah, maybe I would have. That did eventually happen.
So anything you want to highlight that was going on in the background here?
I think I was a little surprised by all the stuff going down between Paraguay and Brazil, because I didn't necessarily see that coming, and then I didn't necessarily see the move sticking, because when a 2-center power stabs a 4-center power, it's kind of surprising when it works. But
yeah, that was an interesting element in this game. There were a lot of I felt like there were a number of upsets of fights that shouldn't have gone the way they did.
Yeah.
We see. We're beginning to see the personalized units in this season. Where I have
alligators, the ghosts.
Yep. Alligators and ghosts. This is where I actually pitch in the fight against Argentina, if only sort of accidentally by walking into Salta.
Oh, did you expect to get bounced out of that?
I did not expect to land in Salta.
Huh.
So that was a pleasant surprise. I actually told Argentina that I would move there because I was going to make a gesture to show you guys that I was on side. But Argentina, I guess, ignored that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Player might not have been playing his strongest game this time.
I don't think he was.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that actually ended up deceiving me pretty well later on because I kind of assumed you were on side because had you taken his center. So, this explains a lot of that later.
And I wasn't necessarily entirely unenthusiastic about getting rid of Argentina either. I was just uneasy about having you and Argentina at my back.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
You and Paraguay at my back, I should say. I wanted one of you gone so that I could have like a secure flank. And if I had that, then I would feel secure fighting Peru or Brazil next.
Right.
But what were you thinking about here?
At this point, I was feeling pretty good because, I picked up another center from Argentina. People seemed to be kind of developing moves against Argentina, which is good for me because I was pretty committed. And so I needed other people to also commit. Yeah, that's about what was happening. I feel like also Argentina wasn't playing that well tactically, which, clearly he wasn't if he let you into Salta on accident. And so I was feeling good about that as well.
Yeah, and Argentina didn't even grab Corrientes, which ended up being vacated by Paraguay at this point.
Yeah, I think at this point, Paraguay was he was feeding Argentina lies about me, but he wasn't necessarily acting aggressive towards Argentina himself. And so there was still some amount of trust there.
Yeah, it is interesting because it was really more about exchanging blows with Brazil, and Venezuela jumps in and helps attack Brazil as well here.
Opportunism.
Nothing wrong with that.
There is not.
Well, here you see you and I are both on the same page, I think. We're both focused on land war right now, building armies. And Paraguay is also building armies, although who Paraguay will be attacking with his army is less clear.
Incredibly up in the air, yeah. And so this is when you launch kind of a small stab against me because I leave my home centers entirely unguarded, which in retrospect may not have been a perfect move. And I kind of, continue to be fully committed against Argentina, and then you just kind of slide that army down the coast. And it's not an ideal situation for me to be in.
Understandably. Kind of a lame half-formed stab, really, in my book. I probably should have.
And I remember being confused because you sent your fleets north, and I'm like, is this even really a stab that's happening? Because he would have moved to Gulf of Guafa.
Yeah, I do think that that makes it feel like less of a stab and more like I'm just taking a walk.
Walk right into your home center.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I took this as a stab. I just, maybe it did soften my emotions a little, I'm not sure. But I did take this as a stab, and I knew that I had misplayed it. And there was nothing more I could do, really.
Well, it's hard to play it in a way where you don't, throw your full force at the person you're trying to fight. It's hard to keep too much in reserve against possible stabs, but I do understand. Yeah.
And I remember this is a thing I noticed about this map is that Argentina in particular has a lot of small areas. And so I remember I needed a lot of armies to kind of traverse Argentina.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think a lot of other places on the board or a lot of other situations I wouldn't have needed all three armies, but I remember really feeling like I needed the extra armies.
Yeah, I think you probably did need as many armies as you could get there because Argentina is able to focus, the full forces of the Argentine military on you, and neither Paraguay nor I at this moment is helping. So
yeah, and so this was a really scary moment for me.
Yeah, I think I was even trying to work with Argentina at this point, trying to get Argentina to work against you on the one side, while I would work against you on the other, and then I would have your coastal centers. I'd have sort of a corner position, and I would have Argentina as a possible ally against Paraguay. And
if y'all had pulled that off, that would have been probably a really good move.
Could have been. But we see, you start to move in a more defensive manner. and Paraguay moves at least one unit in the direction of Argentina here, and you also get into a position where it seems like you'll probably take the Falklands. My stab is kind of losing its luster for me.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
That's kind of abortive. Your fleets still don't come back in health. And so I think this was a really bad situation for me to be in, because also, I have only the two home centers and they're right next to each other. Mm-hmm. And so as long as you have a unit in Valparaiso, it's not safe for me to vacate Santiago in the fall so I can build there.
Accurate, yes.
And so this was a huge momentum kill for me.
Yeah.
I'm sad you didn't get that much out of it, but at the same time, it really did hurt me.
Yeah, I think I was probably conscious of it throwing the brakes on you a bit. The scary thing about this variant is the fact that for most of us, we only had two home centers. For me, I had Antofagasta and La Paz, and for you, it was Valparaiso and Santiago. And your home center situation was even worse than mine because yours were right next to each other.
Yeah. And so, if you're in the one, then I can't safely vacate the other. And so if I ever want to build, there's always a chance that instead of building, well, you got my other home center.
Yeah.
And particularly because the space there is kind of constricted, I was really worrying about, would I even be able to set up, a self-bounce type of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you basically have to devote as many units to that area for a self-bounce as you would to just retake Valparaiso.
Yeah, I would have needed 2-3 units to actually successfully build there. And, considering that I need to build there, I don't have the units to spare.
Yeah, that's true. If I had followed up, it would have been, that could have been such a good move.
Well, I could have been gone.
Yeah, but my eyes were bigger than my belly, and so I was deciding to fight on a northern war and also do this little half-hearted stab. And in the Northern War, I even switched sides. I was initially going to attack Peru, but I didn't want to create a very strong Colombia, so I decided to attack Colombia instead.
Yeah, what could have been?
What could have been, yeah. Just goes to show you commitment. Very important, very powerful.
Yeah, controlling your amount of commitment.
You end up having a destroy here, I see.
Yep, and that's why I had to back off Argentina.
Yeah. I was, I think I was a little worried to see that, because I knew that meant you were going to probably focus a little more on me. I built a fleet which could have been used for anything.
Well, I know what you wanted that fleet for.
And you guessed correctly. We're at sort of a standoff here.
Yeah, we are. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think this was just us playing through the natural consequences of the stab.
Yeah, that's true. Meanwhile, Paraguay is now actually devoting resources to fighting Argentina.
And I really appreciated that, and I think I was asking him for it quite a bit, because I even if I got my center back somehow, I still needed to be able to build, and I needed units to build, because I had to keep fighting you off and ideally, continue making progress somewhere. And so I was really, really hoping for his help against Argentina. And he did come through with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think this makes it more my mistake, because the fact that I stabbed you and Paraguay starts getting some of Argentina just starts to build the Paraguayan powerhouse that ends up being such a concern for me later on.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not going to make any real progress against you now. And Paraguay is just going to grow while you and I maybe stagnate.
Yeah. And so I think this was not necessarily a great year for either of us.
Yeah.
Who was that even a good year for? Paraguay, really.
I mean, yeah, it was a good year for Paraguay. You and I each made some gains. I'm happy that I made peace with Colombia here, so I was able to actually acquire the Galapagos, and
get the support into
a Peruvian center there, whichever one its name is covered up. But yeah, it ended up being like an okay year for me for that reason, and because I made a deal with Colombia at this point that there would be no fleets on his west coast.
Yeah, which seems to have worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, for a long time.
Definitely was a concern for me because I didn't really like that you had that many fleets at all. And so I certainly wasn't a fan of them, not being further north.
Yeah, it's at this point I probably should have committed to killing you off just because by sheer manpower I should have been able to do it maybe.
Yeah, and I think I'm curious what happened in Valparaiso because, I'm not sure. Did you make a mistake because you could have held that indefinitely? And
it's because I decided to go after Islas Juan Fernandez instead of keeping Valparaiso, and I was aware there was a gamble involved. I think I just made the wrong choice. I probably should have kept Valparaiso, but
because I think that's the one set of moves that could have gotten me my home center back, and that I think kept me relevant over the long term.
I think you're right. Especially because you even gained another center this year, which means you're going to get to build in Santiago, which means that taking Santiago back by itself, or taking Valparaiso back, that by itself, that move made you much more secure and greatly decreased my odds of just killing you off.
Yeah. And so I think if last year, really made my game tenuous, this year, got me back in the game.
Yep. I helped make that happen. Whoops. Me and Paraguay.
Kind of the lasting impact of your stab, even though it didn't really work out, is that I was always a couple centers behind you in Paraguay. And so I was never realistically going to be a solo threat. And I was always just slightly behind you two, which also would have made it hard to stab either of you unilaterally.
That is a good point. Yeah.
And so I don't know if you got any long-term benefit, but I definitely got a long-term harm.
In a way, that might be a long-term benefit to me.
That's true.
Except that I'm sure it also harmed our relationship on the board for a while.
It did.
Yeah.
And so here we are, and armies across the board. And I think we made a deal that we would both build armies.
I think you're right. And glad that we both were able to keep that. And I start to be able to have peaceful interactions with you again.
Yeah.
And we both...
I think I didn't need the amount of enemies I had at that point, so I was also glad to no longer be fighting you.
In this game, I think one of my objectives was basically to have almost no enemies at any given time, which I almost have accomplished at this moment on the map because I eliminate Peru. I had made peace with Colombia, and Argentina, who is our last remaining foe, is down to 2 centers now.
Yeah.
But now I have to worry about Paraguay because Paraguay moved west and moved very directly next to my centers.
Yeah.
So what's going on in the background here? You in Paraguay planning an attack right now?
Paraguay and I were obviously coordinating against Argentina, and I think we were looking at attacking you, and I remember not being super on board with that because I wasn't necessarily situated to do it because I didn't feel like I had enough fleets to do it, so I thought he was going to get most of the spoils. And I think this is a period when you were the board leader, so we were hoping to kind of knock you down a peg by attacking you, and I think that's why he made some moves against you to kind of keep you distracted. But I don't know if my heart would have been in a serious attack on you at that point. Also because Colombia had just, disbanded his Pacific fleet, and so I knew that kind of no support would be forthcoming for any of my actions.
Yeah, for me that was a real diplomatic coup.
It was.
That was definitely a moment when I could have parlayed that negotiation success into greater military dominance.
Yeah, and so I think this is possibly one of your strongest points on the board. And I definitely was not willing to attack you during it.
I think it probably is the strongest point for me, yeah.
Yeah.
because I took one of your centers, I took Peru out, I took one of Colombia's centers. I made Colombia agree not to build any Western fleets, and could actually kind of enforce that because I had 2 fleets right near him at that point, and so could punish any decision to build Western fleets on his part. I was looking as strong as I would for the whole game, basically.
Yeah. And so I think at this point we were genuinely worried about you, but not really sure what to do about it.
Yeah, I should have attacked Paraguay, I guess. Or you should have picked one of you and tried to get the other to help me attack. Because and I do decide to kind of make a counter move in the direction of Paraguay, but for some reason I also because of that darn Peruvian fleet, I also moved out of Potosi, and just to defend every center I had, to make sure that they were all defended against any possible attack. I make that really. That move.
So I'm glad that slowed you down.
Yeah, made me very worried because I only had the 2 armies on the east side of the Andes after that. So at this point, what were you thinking?
So at this point, I think you and Paraguay were kind of pressuring me to attack each other, and I was kind of laying back, and I was not necessarily in a position to attack either of you. I wanted to consolidate against Argentina first. In other news, I think this year is the year that Venezuela made a huge mistake, and I forget the details of the mistake, but it definitely happened. And so we saw Colombia over the next couple of years just destroy Venezuela.
Yeah. Well, now that Venezuela is being attacked also by Paraguay, and Venezuela's lost the early center grab from Brazil, Colombia's even got superior forces to Venezuela at this point as well.
Yeah.
So the writing's kind of on the wall there, because unless I go and actually help Venezuela and stab Colombia in the back, Venezuela's not going to be able to recover from this position.
Yeah, I think Venezuela needed help and then was forthcoming. And that had kind of the bad side effect of making Colombia really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a downside there.
But, I couldn't do anything about it.
Right, no.
I was the person least positioned to help Venezuela.
And I didn't feel I could do anything about it either, because I was most worried about Paraguay, because Paraguay seemed positioned to grow by leaps and bounds with Brazil weakened, with Argentina collapsed, and with you probably holding a grudge against me. I was very aware that if I got involved in any other conflict, I might be inviting a stab in the back right away.
Yeah, and that probably is true. I probably would have done that.
Yeah. So I've made myself a bad diplomatic bed, and now I have to sleep in it. And, Paraguay is taking full advantage of that situation. And so, and you're also poised to do so. You build a fleet here, good for attacking me or Paraguay. And at this point, what were you thinking? Were you thinking going after me? Were you thinking...
I was worried about you, but I wasn't really sure what I could accomplish against you. And so I was... Because if you look at it, all I could really accomplish is sending, 2 units against you, because the front is only 2 units wide. And so on the one hand, I had enough units to hold a line against you, but on the other hand, I couldn't really make progress. And so I was pretty concerned about that. And so I would have needed a lot of Paraguayan, not even help, because he can't support me because of the Andes. So I would have needed a lot of Paraguayan distraction. And I would have needed you to choose to fight Paraguay instead of me, which I couldn't really rely on.
Yeah, I don't think you could, because I think fighting you would be a lot easier.
So I probably would. I was cognizant of that. And so I wanted to fight you, but I knew I couldn't really.
I remember, I think I even had a defensive plan in my head at this point, where I was thinking, if Paraguay and Chile stab me, what I do is I try to pull all the units I can back toward the Andes. I can defend Potosi by supporting it from La Paz and Antofagasta, and I can defend all of my coastal centers that are on the west side of the Andes with just my 3 fleets. So I should be able to bottleneck any fleet movement on your part. And for that reason, I think you would have probably gained almost nothing from stabbing me. You would have retaken Islas Juan Fernandez, but unless I really let my guard down on the west coast, which I wasn't going to because it was so much more defensible than my stuff on the east of the Andes, unless I really let my guard down, you weren't going to be able to make much advancement.
Yeah, and that's pretty true, and I was aware of that, which is ultimately why I never made a serious move against you at this point. I remember being pretty frustrated that Colombia wouldn't build a Pacific fleet because I knew he had a deal with you. I don't think he ever told me, but it was pretty obvious that there was a deal in play. And so, I knew why it was happening, but I was really frustrated. It was frustrating because I understood why everyone was behaving the way they were, and it was leaving me behind. And it was letting you and Colombia get big.
Yeah. And it was pretty scary for me too as well, just to have Colombia getting so big.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah. But at this point, bad stuff starts happening for me. I'm now in a fight with Paraguay, and also I'm also moving to defend myself against possible attack by you, or to possibly attack you, which I think, arguably a good call.
Yeah, and I think that was semi-negotiated. We knew what each other was going to do there.
That makes sense.
And I think Paraguay was willing to cede me a center because I was at like 6 centers and he was at like 9. And so I was going to take that center that was being ceded by Paraguay. But part of that was I had to be fighting you and not him. So
I think I was not entirely content with the situation. I didn't want you to just be walking into one center of Paraguay's. I wanted you to actually fight Paraguay alongside me, and I knew that was the only way I was actually going to win, because Paraguay had quite a large land force and was in a much better position than me as well.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I just was more happy to get one center ceded to me than to open myself up to fight for a couple centers.
Yeah, I understand. Especially because, Argentina's still not quite dead.
Yeah, and that was a terrible distraction because I had 2 or 3 centers that he could reach within a year.
That one Argentine fleet.
Yeah, and he was there for several years after this. It was terrible.
It is terrible, really. And here we see, I'm continuing to lose ground to Paraguay and continuing to move my units in the sea spaces next to your centers.
Yeah, and I remember not being happy about that, but kind of the calculation I was doing was I wasn't super happy with your fleets anywhere in the Pacific because, the sea spaces are pretty big. So even if they were up in the Nazca Sea, that's still only a year and a half away from me. And so I was much happier if you were going to move your fleets into the Atlantic. And so I was willing to take a certain amount of risk to kind of facilitate that. Because if they're in the Atlantic, then they're not my problem, they're Paraguay's.
I do remember us negotiating that together. Here is also where Colombia is beginning to move a few units south, because Colombia is negotiating with me the idea that he's going to come and support me against Paraguay. And
that seems like a certain degree of BS, but if that's what you want, then
yeah, there's definitely a certain amount of there's clearly opportunity knocking for Colombia here.
And there certainly was. And I remember around this point we were starting to negotiate draws, and Colombia was hoping for a 3-way draw. And I remember always being a little skeptical about him saying, I want to draw, I'm not really interested in a solo. I remember always being a little skeptical of that because, everyone wants a solo.
Yeah.
Well, I apparently should have been a lot more skeptical of that.
Yeah, I think I disbelieve whenever anyone says that, but Colombia was being kind of, a little bit low-key about what he was doing for a while.
Yeah, he was saying all the right things.
Yeah. until the moment when it was no longer necessary for Colombia. We see here that I think I got to build just because one of my units got destroyed. You got to build, and you built an army, which is...
That was a pretty agonizing build for me, because I knew I had to choose fighting you or fighting Paraguay, and that build was kind of going to determine who I fought.
Yeah.
And I wanted to fight you because I think I was more worried about you threatening me than Paraguay. But ultimately, Paraguay had a greater upside also because his centers are way less defensible than yours.
Yeah. I was really I was really ready to make sure that you would regret it if you built a fleet with whatever.
And it was also that because you had 3 fleets right next to me.
That's what we call gunboat diplomacy, folks. Once you built that army, I think I was very relieved and started to think, maybe this game can be salvaged for me. Maybe Paraguay can be pushed back into the sea.
Yeah, and I was kind of hoping to grow beyond 8 centers,
Yeah.
And I didn't really care who I had to step on to get that, but I wanted to be a little more relevant.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And you see, this point, you and I both start making some tentative moves against Paraguay. And Paraguay is trying to defend against both of us and also finish off Brazil, and is starting to leave some centers like Maranhão vulnerable to Colombia.
And so Paraguay he's making it work for a little bit. He's making it work, and that's because we weren't in like an ideal stabbing position.
Right.
I think if we had kept this up, then Paraguay would have fallen.
Oh, definitely. It could have been a 3-power draw with Yumi in Colombia.
Yeah, it could have been.
But, at a certain point, you see here we're still fighting Paraguay, and Colombia's units are in this dangerous position now.
Yeah, where he's not attacking you, but he could at any time.
Yes, he could at any time sweep down.
That's actually true for Paraguay also. So.
Yeah. And I was actually pretty nervous about this by this point. I don't know if it was something that was bothering you as well, or just something that you noticed, or you hoped would happen.
I think I was also saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to leave a couple units back to cover your Peruvian centers? I remember saying something like that.
Yeah, and I do actually move back into Lima so that fleet can defend Trujillo from Colombia.
Yeah, and so I think kind of the good thing that happens for me this year is that we finally get a unit adjacent to Malvinas, which, had taken several years to accomplish, because I had my eye on that center since the 3rd year, and I think this is the 6th or 7th, so...
Oh my gosh, that's crazy,
Yeah, it's only got 2 things bordering it, and he had a fleet there, and I couldn't get by.
Yeah,
that's terrible.
That's nuts, really. Anyway, we are taking ground from Paraguay here as well, so it's all around a pretty good season. We both get builds.
Somehow Paraguay gets builds as well, so I think he just made so much progress against Brazil that he still got to build.
Yeah, he finished Brazil off and got 2 centers from that alone. So that did end up being very good for Paraguay, that he prosecuted that 2-front war.
Yeah.
And now we see the stab from Colombia comes, and now from being united against Paraguay, you and I and Paraguay are now all concerned about Colombia.
Yeah, and we're in this Stop the Leader Alliance. And for a little bit, the Stop the Leader Alliance was actually working pretty well.
Yes. After the initial shock of the stab, we all start coordinating and moving our forces and mutually supporting each other. And pretty quickly, I think, we had kind of a line on land.
Yeah, and I think the land line was super stable.
Yes, it could have been unbreakable for us.
And the fleets were still fluid, but I think there's stalemate lines to be had on this map. We just didn't find them.
I think you're right. I think we almost did find the stalemate lines, really, or at
Yeah,
least a stalemate line. Especially because the fleets really don't matter as much as they initially seemed to on this map. Because
yeah,
there's just so few sea spaces relative to these dozens and dozens of land spaces.
yeah. There's things that are like triply landlocked on this board.
Yeah. So we are moving against Colombia. We're moving against Colombia. I get a new fleet because fleets will be useful against Colombia. Colombia sneaks into Lima, which is actually preventable on my part. It's just a mistake by me. I shouldn't have bothered bouncing Nazca C. I should have bounced Lima with that unit instead, and I could have moved Trujillo to Nazca C if I was assuming that I was going to bounce with Colombia anyway.
Yeah,
But
I think it was a preventable mistake, but it also was a recoverable mistake. So
yeah, somewhat understandable. Hard to really guess what's going to happen.
yeah,
Colombia could have done something tricky and gotten me in Nazca C and himself in Trujillo if it had gone the other way maybe. But
yeah,
it wasn't a subtle sort of, we didn't play things out in that subtle kind of way where people are trying to outthink each other in loops like
and
that.
like expecting the balance and double and triple bluffing. Yeah,
Exactly, yeah. Um, but we're all kind of doing a good job with our teamwork right now.
yeah, we were.
Yeah. We're trying to stop Colombia, and now we kind of have a defensible line against Colombia. And this is
We
the
do.
point I think when I was saying we should and can begin to actually advance.
Yes.
And this is where we actually moved a fleet north into Bahia de Todos los Santos, and I thought that could have been the thin end of the wedge. We could have moved a fleet along the coast into Salvador, and from there we maybe could have gotten one into Pernambuco, and if we had that, then we could have forced Bahia San Marcos and started getting fleets up behind Colombia's lines into the north, the Atlantic Ocean, Boca de Navios, and from there we would probably have been able to start attacking Colombia's northernmost centers and basically opened up a whole second front.
Yeah, and I totally agree there, and I also saw those moves. And I was like, I know what happens next year, but I was not especially enthused about what happens next year. I was kind of hoping that we could keep sliding north and eventually either overcome or force a four-way draw.
Yeah.
But I also know what we did next year, so.
Yeah, I was really hopeful that we would actually successfully push Colombia back. I think because as with what you're saying, I think it was totally possible because I think we have a stalemate position and Colombia doesn't. On the west coast, I think Colombia's position is really defensible because everything on the west coast is defensible.
Funny thing about the Andes.
Yeah, apparently they kill military advancement. Progress is really hard. These are retreats. Colombia gets a new fleet and a new army. But those are the last gains I think we expected him to make. And then you guys stabbed me.
Yeah, we did. And so kind of what was happening here is, so Colombia had been pushing pretty hard for a three-way draw for a long time. And I think he didn't ever even mention the possibility of a four-way draw, so he was really, really pushing for that three-way draw. And ultimately, I think just through like the foibles of how you and Paraguay ended up being positioned, we were way, way more confident about whittling you out of the draw than we were about Paraguay. And I think that was just like the way the positions ended up being. Yeah. And the thing about this is, if you look at South Pacific Ocean, you wanted to support that fleet into Nazca C, and then really the only move that makes any sense is for Golfo de Guapo to backfill.
Is for Golfo to what? Sorry?
To fill back into South Pacific Ocean.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if I moved that fleet, then I would really no longer ever be in a position to stab you because, I wasn't going to get another center. I wasn't going to build another fleet. And so if we wanted to stab you, it had to be that.
So it had a certain amount of urgency, I see.
Yeah, because, if I held Golfo de Guapo back, you you naturally would have started asking questions, and you probably would have covered Antofagasta. And the thing about the Andes is it's really hard to attack, especially if the other guy sees you coming. And so that probably wouldn't ever have worked out if we hadn't done it then.
It does kind of have a certain logic to it, but
yeah, and I think, in hindsight, it was a mistake. I was wondering at the time if it was a mistake because, Colombia is right there. And I think we thought we could stop Colombia at 17. And that's a risky game to play, but we were going to play it. And kind of the other thing is the liability with kind of all three of us pushing north towards Colombia is that really I was behind, and because Paraguay is mostly on land, he would also have been mostly behind. And so I think we were worried that if this kind of broke the game wide open again and it was like a race to 18 now, that you would be the one to profit from that. Or at least I was worried that it wouldn't be me. And I wonder if Paraguay was worried it would be you. And so we convinced ourselves that stabbing you was in our best interest and nothing bad would happen. And then once we had convinced ourselves of that, this was the time to stab.
Oh, yeah, no, I see it. I was actually kind of like, as much as I was ticked off at being stabbed, I also thought, well, it is a devastating stab. I lost 3 centers in one fell swoop, and the very next season I lose 2 more, so I'm down to just 3. And
yeah, it was a big stab.
It was a big stab.
It felt good to pull off, and that was the last good feeling we had that game.
Yeah.
And so what happened this year is Colombia took La Paz, and he wasn't supposed to take La Paz. We had negotiated, or at least Paraguay had negotiated, that he wouldn't take La Paz, that would go to Paraguay. And so arguably we should have seen that and gone, oh, Colombia is clearly going for a solo. We should stop now. And I think that was genuinely a bad call on our part to not try and stop there.
Oh, well, I mean, I think at this point it was probably too late.
And it possibly was too late years earlier when you proposed a 4-way draw and the rest of us all ignored it. But this is the last opportunity anyone had to make a difference, and we certainly totally ignored that one too. So
I think it became too late at this point because with me down to just 3 centers, I think this is where I resolved that I'm probably going to throw the game to Colombia.
Yeah, and we realized you might do that, and I guess we were thinking that we could either prevent you from doing it or like somehow forcibly defend your centers against your will or something.
Yeah.
Because we didn't expect you to make the actual moves you did, I think.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, because it's...
Yeah, because you made that convoy to shoot Atacama. That's what this space is called. You made the convoy to Atacama. And I don't think we saw that coming.
No, because looking back, you could have bounced it. Oh, well, no, you couldn't have, actually, because I supported it.
I actually tried to bounce it, but you supported it.
Yeah. That was an unlucky moment for you.
Yeah, it certainly was. Because from that point, you can throw the game by just moving Arica out of the way, and there's nothing we could really do about it.
Yeah. And I tried to negotiate. Paraguay started talking to me at this point, and I tried to negotiate.
We started talking to you. We proposed and accepted a 4-way draw.
Yeah.
And I think Colombia just pointed out, hey, I can back off and let them eliminate you anyway, and that was that.
Yeah, I mean, Colombia just said basically that that they probably weren't interested in accepting the draw, and I myself, I said, well, then Colombia will just back off and let them eliminate me. It's either that or I throw the game to Colombia, because you guys would have no reason to keep me alive, and you've shown a preference for eliminating me in the last year. So I shouldn't expect you guys to let me remain alive, and for that reason, I should just follow through with what I had decided to do, and make that statement of saying, if I'm not among the winner's circle, neither are you guys.
And that's fair. And I think there's probably an argument to be made for like you should stick around longer and try and like work something out with us where you can be sure you'll remain alive. But I also totally can see where you were coming from with they have no real reason to remain alive. And I know I personally like looked at the map for a while and I was like trying to find a way that we could guarantee that your survival was in our best interest, and I wasn't really seeing a whole lot. So
yeah, I don't think it was actually possible. And if I had thought it was possible, I would have kept fighting. But given that me being in the draw seemed to be impossible at that point, for all practical purposes, I mean, the only reason I would be in the draw is just if you guys decided basically that I was too likable to eliminate.
Hey man, you stabbed me in year 3. You were not too likable to eliminate.
Well, I suppose that's your opinion. No, but you're right. Yeah, I think given that the only thing protecting me from elimination at that point would have been my personal charm, I decided to give it to Colombia, who I thought, by playing it as he did, at least played the last few years really well and played a lot.
He played a good game.
What'd you say?
He played a good game.
Oh yeah, I think he played an excellent game. So I didn't feel too bad about him getting a solo here. Even though he stabbed me, he also had attacked Paraguay at the same time, going for the solo, and I thought he showed kind of a longer term vision, and I did not appreciate being stabbed for while we were in the stop the solo alliance.
Yeah, and I was wondering if it was a bad call, and I wouldn't have minded a 4-way draw. And I think if I were gonna play it again, I probably would have advocated more strongly for the 4-way draw at that point, and said, "Hey, I'm willing to do the 4-way draw. Hey, I'll accept Ferdinand's 4-way draw." And I'm not sure that would have changed anything, but I think it might have. At the very least, it would have made Colombia aware that, hey, he's worried about this. And so maybe he would have backed off before we stabbed you and, settled for the 3-way draw instead of trying to solo because we stabbed you so kind of last minute.
Maybe. I mean, I don't think... I think it's pretty difficult in most circumstances for a player to give up on trying to advance if they know that the allies against them are actually fighting each other a little bit.
And that's absolutely true. And so I guess what I think is if I hadn't signaled that, then maybe he wouldn't have seen that crack in the alliance. And if Paraguay hadn't signaled that, then maybe he wouldn't have seen the crack. And then we could have pulled out a better result for us. But hindsight's 20/20, so
I think that's a good point. Well, I had a good game with you.
Yeah.
And thank you for participating in the after action report call, despite technical difficulties and everything. Do you have any last words of wisdom for the audience?
Words of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Don't stab your stop the solo allies. It's a bad move, and I shouldn't have done it.
I think that actually is pretty wise. I mean, maybe you can. I would say you can maybe stab your stop the solo ally if you actually had started to already push the solo threat back, or
Yes.
something like that. Or if you have control over a stable line or something.
But if y'all had stabbed me, then I think that wouldn't have created the same level of risk. And I appreciate that you didn't. But
Well, I was at that point. I was singing "Kumbaya" basically because I knew that I needed you guys, and if we didn't all work together, we were not going to last. It's pretty sure.
And so we made mistakes, and because of that, Colombia won.
No, we all made mistakes. Yeah, I definitely made a bunch of mistakes. Well, good talking to you. I hope
Good talking to you.
See each other on the diplomacy board again soon sometime. I hope you liked this video. If you did, you too can participate in helping me make and promote great diplomacy content, either by joining my supporters on Patreon or by writing subtitles for the videos in other languages, in addition to liking, subscribing, and commenting, all of which helps this channel grow. Follow the links in the video description or comment below for more. And I would like to briefly thank the people who are already helping me out via the methods I've mentioned, whose names and screen names are on the screen now. Let's keep going and make this the biggest diplomacy community out there. Let's try and hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Until next time, Florida Man out.